Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Stephen Vaughn, former United States Trade Representative and former General Counsel to the US Trade Representative. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. What's President Trump aiming to achieve here with these hefty tariffs that have just taken effect on India?
Well, I think first of all, we've had a number of trade disputes with India down through the years. They run a fairly significant trade surplus with the United States, and that's been a concern of the U.S. government for a long time. But I think he's also been very much affected by the ongoing trade between the U.S., between India and Russia. And he's made very clear that he's not happy with India buying so much Russian oil. He feels like that's supporting some of the activities that Russia's undertaking in Ukraine. And I think this is part of an effort to get them to engage and to take that issue more seriously.
And which sectors of the Indian economy do you think are going to be most hard hit?
I think it's not so much, obviously manufacturing will take a hit. They have a very robust manufacturing sector and obviously they would normally be looking to sort of grow and take more market share, particularly given the tariffs on China. So that's going to be a challenge for them. It's also going to make it more difficult for them as people are looking for alternatives to China and potential different ways of serving the U.S. market. It's going to make it harder for India to compete for that business. So I would say basically anything in the manufacturing sector, anything where they might otherwise have more of an opportunity to take sales from China.
I mean, this is a major economy we're talking about here. More than 1 billion people live in India. We're talking about the 5th biggest economy in the world. And it is, in fact, according to some estimates, the world's fastest growing economy. Do you think this is going to change that? Do you think that speed of growth is going to come down a few notches as a result of these tariffs?
Well, I certainly think it's going to be a challenge for them. I mean, obviously they have an export-oriented economy, and like a lot of countries, they've sort of looked to build up a lot of capacity in that market and try to serve other countries by exporting. The U.S. if you're an exporter, the U.S. is the best market in the world. There's no other market that's been as open. There's no other big country that's been willing to run the type of trade deficits that we've been willing to run. There's no other market that has the kind of distribution system that we have. So it's just a really great market to be in, and it's going to be very difficult, I think, for them to maintain their current trajectory if they don't have access to this market.
But they do have other trade partners, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, Gulf countries. I mean, do you think they're simply going to redirect their efforts to countries they perceive as being less hostile as trading partners?
I'm sure they're going to try that, but there's a couple of problems. First of all, there's not any other economy that's as big as the U.S. and as open as the U.S. China is a big economy. It's not a very open economy. Europe is already facing a large amount of pressure on its own end in terms of increasing volumes of imports that they're seeing from China and from other markets. And then once you get beyond those two economies, you don't have the same scale really anywhere else. So I think it is going to be a real challenge for them to try to replace any lost sales to the U.S. market.
The Indian Prime Minister is set to visit China at the end of this month. Some might argue that the United States has thrust India into the very open arms of China. What would you say to that?
I mean, look, I think that, again, the problem here is that India is supporting Russia and helping Russia to get around our sanctions. So it's going to be difficult to go to U.S. policymakers and say, we need to be doing more favors for India at a time when India is taking such a hostile line in terms of its own attitude toward geopolitical issues. So I think that's going to be a difficult argument to make over here.
Do you think there's a message in here for the rest of the world, which is, when the United States imposes sanctions on a country, you simply do not try to circumvent them? Is that the key message contained in this?
Well, I think the Americans are look, I think more and more, I think Americans appreciate the importance of this market, what a great resource it is, not only for us, but for the rest of the world. And I think that what the president is talking about a lot and trying to get other countries to realize is that trading with the United States is a privilege. and it's a great privilege, and it can really do a lot of good for your country. But it is a privilege, and if you don't want to be cooperative with us and you want to be independent and you want to pursue totally policies that we regard as hostile or adverse to our interests, that's obviously your right as a free and sovereign country, but it is going to have consequences in terms of how much access you have to this market. And I definitely think that is something that the Americans are going to take more seriously going forward. And I think it's something that the rest of the world is going to take more seriously.
Do you think this is going to have lasting effects on the relationship between Washington and New Delhi? Do you think this is going to damage ties in the medium to longer term?
I mean, I think it's a lot of it's obviously up to the policymakers in India. I mean, the U.S. has been doing trade policy for a long time. We've had a lot of trade disputes. We used to have a lot of trade disputes with Japan back in the 70s and 80s. We used to have a lot of trade disputes. We've had trade disputes with Europe for decades, and we've never really let it undermine our willingness to cooperate on geopolitical issues when we can. So I think it's up to them. I think they have choices to make in terms of what kind of a relationship they want to have with the United States. I think the president's been very clear. The president's been very careful not to criticize Mr. Modi by name or his policies or anything like that, like we've seen him do with some other leaders. He's definitely leaving the door open to have conversations to work this out. And I think it's very likely that over time you'll see very productive negotiations between India and the United States.
I mean, Mr. Trump has been in office now for, getting on 8 months. India isn't an isolated case, is it? There have been lots of other countries that have been subject to quite hefty tariffs. On the issue of tariffs, what's been the scorecard, would you say, for the Trump administration? How has all of this worked out? And do you think things have gone more or less according to plan as far as President Trump is concerned?
Oh yeah, I think it's been a huge success, to be honest. I mean, first of all, people thought there was concern about inflation. Inflation is still relatively low. There was concern about supply chain difficulties or shortages. We haven't seen anything like that. Stock market is close to all-time highs. The Congress approved his tax cut measure. Jay Powell is indicating that we may be getting interest rate cuts here fairly soon, which is another thing the president's been looking for. The economic news has generally been quite favorable in recent months, and he's bringing in a lot of new tariff revenues, which he thinks is going to help with some of our fiscal issues. And he got trade deals with the EU, with Japan, with Korea, with the UK, with lots of our other big trading partners. So yes, it has been enormously successful, both in economic terms and in political terms.
And how does the U.S. economy feel at the moment? Does it feel like things are on a roll at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hope and optimism over here. I mean, you see that in the corporate profit numbers that came out in the last quarter. You see it in sort of how investors are viewing the stock market. You see it in people know these tax cuts are going to kick in, and they know that there's likely going to be lower interest rates. That's going to have positive, favorable developments. So I think you see a lot of optimism over here right now.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, circling back to the case of India, what would be your advice to Prime Minister Narendra Modi for him to rectify the situation and get that trading relationship with the world's largest economy back on track?
I mean, look, India is a great country. They're going to do what they think is in their best interest. But obviously, I think if you want to have a better trading relationship with the United States, I think you have to look carefully at what Japan did and what the EU did and what Korea has done and what other countries have done. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to make sense to come to the table and sit down with President Trump and work out an arrangement that's going to be beneficial to both countries. And I think the sooner he does that, the better off India will be.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. Stephen Vaughn, former US Trade Representative, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.